So it's truly a privilege for me being a man and being here.
Mm.
But it's just as important that men and boys are involved as well in this kind of discussions.
Yes.
So without further ado, I will ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Now we're going to start with the girls, right? We have Fatima and Umi.
Yes.
So Fatima, if you could please
Yes.
tell us your full name, what grade you are in, and how old you are.
Good afternoon to you all. My name is Fatima Kamara. I am 12 years old. I am in grade 8 and I'm attending Brimao Upper Basic School.
That's great, 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 great. Thank you, Fatima. Now we'll transition to Umi.
Good afternoon to you all. My name is Umiwan. I'm a grade 9 student of the Gambia Methodist Academy and I'm 14 years old.
All right. Thank you, ladies. You two look amazing, by the way. Very
Thank
beautiful.
you.
Love the outfits. All right, and then we'll just transition to the doctors. I suppose we can begin with Dr. Jai. If you could tell us your full name, introduce yourself, provide as much information as you want. Maybe give us a biography of your academic achievements and what you're presently doing.
Okay, thank you very much, JP. Yes, my name is Ramatulai Njai. In Gambia, I'm known as Ramu. In Senegal, I'm known as Rama. They're both short forms of Ramatulai. So I am a doctor, a medical doctor, a specialist, but I'm also a scientist who's interested in research. So I was born in Banjul, the Gambia. I went to St. Mary's School, primary school, and then Gambia High School, where I did my O and A levels. And after that, I went on actually to study science. So I did a first degree in science at the University of Lagos in Nigeria. After which I went to medical school. I studied medicine there and did what is known as housemanship or house job at the Lagos University Teaching Hospital. After that, I came back home and worked for a year as a junior doctor at the then Royal Victoria Hospital, which is now known as the Edward Francis Small Teaching Hospital. After which I went over to MRC as a junior research clinician to do a project on malaria immunology with the then director, Professor Brian Greenwood. So from there, I proceeded to the UK where I did a specialization. But before you can do specialization in the UK, if you're an overseas graduate, you have to take certain exams. So I had to take this CLAB exam, which allowed me to then enter specialist training, which I did first in internal medicine. And that means that I went through all the different areas of medicine. I rotated through, cardiology, nephrology, gastroenterology, et cetera, and all junior doctors do that so that you can find out which area you love and which area excites and motivates you the most. So from that, I went on to do what's called higher specialist training in gastroenterology. That is the study of digestive diseases, diseases of the gullet, the stomach, the intestines, the liver, and so on. And halfway through that, I was fortunate to be awarded a fellowship, which led to me doing a PhD. So I did a research, I took time out from my specialist training and did a PhD in viral immunology, at the end of which I was awarded a PhD degree by the University of Birmingham. And then I went on to complete my specialist training and also did subspecialty training in hepatology because I was really, really interested in diseases of the liver, which affect us in the Gambia a lot. So I went on to the Royal Free Hospital to do, as well as University Hospital Birmingham, to do hepatology, which is specialization in the liver, and liver transplantation. At the end of which I worked as a specialist. I worked as a gastroenterologist and hepatologist in the UK National Health Service, after which I was recruited by the World Health Organization International Agency for Research in Cancer to lead 2 projects which are aimed at basically implementing strategies for prevention of liver cancer, prevention and treatment of conditions that lead to liver cancer. I did that for 9 years. At the end of the project, I was appointed as a professor of medicine at the University of the Gambia, which was around mid last year, subsequent to which I was appointed as the acting provost. I lead the medical school in the University of the Gambia. It's called the School of Medicine and Allied Health Sciences. And that is what I'm doing currently.
Thank you. Yeah, that was actually amazing. By the way, congratulations. Thanks for sharing that. Thank you. I think that's remarkable, for me being a Gambian, obviously. I mean, just give me a sense of pride, to see, one of our own to achieve such success. It's incredible. Now we'll just transition and go to Dr. Salah.
Thank you, JP. I mean, it's really hard to follow after Professor Njai has just given her bio. She's someone that a lot of us young women in the field look up to. She set the bar really high for us. So hopefully we can meet it. So a bit about myself. My name is Nene Salah. I'm from the Gambia. I grew up in Fajara. As a young girl, I went to Marina International School where I was really drawn to the sciences. I was really good with numbers, and I was good with, I loved chemistry as a student. And when you're bright in school, a lot of the times you're pushed towards the sciences. So it was kind of a great fit for me. I wanted to study medicine, but at the time I was doing my A-levels. And the university was really young at the time. My parents couldn't really afford to pay for me to study overseas, to go to medical school because it was super expensive. So one of the options was I had a family member who said, hey, said to my mom, your daughter's really bright. She's really interested in science. Why don't we, try and get her into MR, the Medical Research Council in the Gambia, to work as an intern so she can get to see what we do. At that time, I had no idea what research was. For me, if you studied science, you were either an engineer or a medical doctor. Research was only for old white men. It was never something that appealed to someone, to a young Black or Gambian woman. However, when I joined the MRC, I started working in the clinical labs where I, did rotations through the hematology lab. So that's the lab that does, most of the bleedings to test for things like malaria or just, your, to see the function of other organs in your body, like do a liver test and things like that. I did work in the clinical microbiology lab where I was learning about infection and being able to diagnose people with different types of infection. And then there was a job opening after 6 months of my internship to work in the research lab. And at that point, I still didn't know any Gambian working in research. But then I came across this really brilliant young scientist. She had just finished from her PhD. I think she was in her late 20s. Her name was Har Njai. And I was just fascinated by the fact that she was young and Gambian, and she had a PhD. I said to her, I thought PhDs were for old people. So anyway, she kind of took me on as a little sister and mentored me, and I really looked up to her. So she and this other scientist called Patamba kind of guided me through MRC, and I was fortunate enough to land a research position. So post high school, I worked at the MRC unit for 2 years, looking at infectious diseases, particularly tuberculosis. So looking at how TB was being transmitted in the Gambia, what types of strains of TB were circulating, how people were responding to treatment. So all of these things were to really guide public health measures. From there, there were, at the time, there were scholarships offered by the MRC that were available to nationals, and you had to compete for them. So in my second year, I competed and won one of the biomedical science scholarships to study at the University of Manchester. And that's when my career in science really kind of took off. So I studied biomedical science with a specialization in microbiology at the University of Manchester, as I was already biased towards infection. And I mean, Gambia had such a high burden of infectious disease. It's something that, was of public health interest. I spent every summer during my undergraduate studies back at the MRC, working in the labs. It was a really fun time. There were a lot of other young people from different schools in the Gambia, from Gambia High, Methodist. It also gave me that option to interact with so many different students and build new relationships. Post my degree, I went back to the Gambia and I was working for a year at the MRC. And at that time, the unit was generating a lot of data through its research platform. So, our expertise really lied in clinical work and also in, what we called bench lab work. So this means, you're doing a lot of assays in the lab physically. And so with all these different methods of research, you tend to generate a lot of information. And because we didn't have the expertise on the ground, we relied heavily on partnerships with universities outside of the Gambia and mostly in Europe or America to help us understand this data. And I said to myself, I feel like we're missing out on, playing with our own data. So I sought guidance from my professors, my supervisors, who were really, I feel like, inspirational. And they said to me, hey, bioinformatics and genomics is really kicking off. The Human Genome Project had just kicked off. So this was this massive effort to sequence or, to capture every single gene and base in a human to help inform, medicine ultimately and understand populations. So I said to myself, okay, well, I definitely need to learn more. And I started looking for scholarships every day online, like most other young Gambian students at the time. And I said, okay, whatever opportunity I have, whether it's to study genetics or bioinformatics or microbiology, for me, it was just to study more. I needed to know more. And I was hoping that I could have it for free because education is quite expensive. So I then landed successfully. I competed for a global scholarship offered by the Wellcome Trust Sanger Institute to do a 4-year PhD at the University of Cambridge. And that, also then took me towards that direction. I was the only student from Africa in my entire cohort. I think nonetheless, it put a lot of, I guess, pressure on me to excel. I had this, what they call imposter syndrome. I felt like I was selected because I was the token Black child or African child. But really, I was really good. I was just really good. And it took me a lot of years to really take that in. So at Cambridge, I studied genetic basis of infectious disease, but more on the human side, because the Human Genome Project and genomics was kicking off. It was mainly in populations of European ancestry. So mainly, I guess, white Caucasians were mainly understudied. And I had the opportunity to look at human genetics from an African perspective because the institute I was at had the funding and interest to do that. So I studied the genetic basis of infection in a Ugandan population cohort. And it was so fascinating to me that I felt like, okay, genetics is not something that, we're really into. It wasn't the direction that the MRC unit was going. So I felt like if I build skills in this area, I can complement whatever research was happening on the ground. And then I could learn some new skills. So instead of being a wet lab scientist, I learned how to code. I taught myself to code with the support of many people. I taught myself how to apply statistical methods to analyze what we call big data, so huge amounts of data and different types of it. And this really allowed me to pivot. It meant I could direct my career in ways that I couldn't before, and gave me flexibility. It now means that, you know, in the COVID era, I can work from home because all my work is on my computer. Sorry to ramble, but
no, that's fine.
I finished my PhD in Cambridge. I worked there for an additional year as a research fellow, and then I moved to the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where I decided to continue working on human genetics, still in infection, but across different populations. So not only Africa, but I spent a lot of time in Asia. And the one thing that was very clear was Asians invest a lot in research, a lot in education. So by the first year of my position at London School, I was in Asia every couple of months to run training workshops, because they were really keen on building capacity on the ground. So I carried on doing that. I also lectured. I also lectured on, you know, microbiology and epidemiology for MSc and PhD students, and supervised students myself. So I did that for 3 years. And last year, in the middle of the pandemic, I moved to University College London, so UCL, specifically the Institute of Health Informatics, where I've kind of shifted my research focus a little bit. So I've moved away from infectious disease, and I'm applying the same approaches. So looking at genetic variation in diverse populations, but looking at non-communicable diseases. So heart failure in particular, and heart diseases. And, you know, it's also given me the opportunity to grow whilst Africa picks up its pace in terms of generating African data, because that's quite limiting. You know, I'd love to work more on African genetics, but we're not there yet, but we are getting there. I also, on a side note, I also consult for WHO on non-communicable disease and mental health investments. So I work with country teams and governments to help them advocate and invest on non-communicable diseases. I've also co-founded with my ex-MRC colleagues, who are basically like family now. So we all kind of grew up in the system. We've co-founded an organization called Health and Science for Gambia. And it's mainly to try and strengthen the research and higher education capacity in the Gambia. And we work very closely with the University of the Gambia Science Student Association. So it's you know, we have a lot of brilliant, keen students in the Gambia, and, you know, just feeling represented, realizing that there was a time in the Gambia, there weren't many, maybe Dr. Njai's time, there were maybe a handful of Gambians with PhDs, let alone Gambian women. She was probably one of the rare ones at the time. But now we have over 20, 30 Gambians with PhDs, and that's just incredible. I mean, it is our time now to set our own, you know, research agendas and drive our own research. Like, us being, you know, grabbing the bulls by the horn means that we do things that are beneficial for us, and then we can have equity in this as well. Yeah.
Fascinating. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Man, as you were speaking, I'm sitting here getting chills. Like, I mean, this is just remarkable, to be honest. Wow. Just amazing. Thank you for sharing that. That's extensive. I mean, I know you speak on the human genome. That's something that fascinates me anyway. You know, I read a little bit about Frank Collins, right? Francis Collins. He headed the Human Genome Project here in the United States a few years back. It's not really even too long ago, you know, to hear you speak about that. I mean, it's quite something.